The frost on the windows of her small flat in Kensington Palace blurred the world into a soft, white haze. Catherine, the Princess of Wales, sat at her kitchen table, a steaming mug of tea cradled in her hands. It was the morning of her birthday, January 9th, and the day promised the usual, lovely rhythm of private celebrations, a quiet breakfast with William and the children, perhaps a video call with her parents, and siblings, a few select gifts. The public would see a new portrait released by the palace. There would be a flood of well wishes on social media, and that would be that. Another year marked with graceful, predictable duty. On the table beside her, between a coloring book belonging to Charlotte and a stack of official correspondence, lay a single, crisp envelope. It had arrived by special courier an hour prior, its heavy paper and discreet crest marking it as formally significant, but not immediately extraordinary. She assumed it was another official birthday greeting from a foreign dignitary or a government office. She would open it later, after the chaos of getting George, Charlotte, and Louis ready for the day. The ordinary morning, with its familiar, comforting clutter, gave no hint that the envelope contained words that would redefine her place in history, an honor so rare it had gathered dust for centuries, waiting for a person exactly like her to breathe life into it again. The quiet before the seismic shift was, in every way, utterly ordinary. As the children's laughter echoed from another room, William entered, pressing a kiss to the top of her head. "Happy birthday, my love," he said, his voice warm. "Anything special you'd like to do today? The diary is clear, for once." She smiled, gesturing to the happy noise. "This is all I need." Later, when the house settled into a brief lull, she finally slid a letter opener under the flap of the formal envelope. The document inside was not a simple greeting. It was a vellum parchment, headed with the royal coat of arms and the distinctive insignia of the Cabinet Office. The language was dense, legalistic, and profoundly archaic. As her eyes scanned the lines, her breath caught. Phrases like "by the sovereign's soul" and "personal prerogative," in recognition of exceptional and singular service to the crown and the nation, and the ancient title of Princess of Wales and Duchess of Cornwall leaped out. Her mind, trained to understand protocol, stumbled. She was already the Princess of Wales. But the conjunction "and" was deliberate, heavy with meaning. William, noticing her stillness, came over. "Everything all right?" She handed him the parchment, wordless. He read it, his eyebrows climbing. This is the Cornwall title. In her own right," he murmured, more to himself than to her. "They're separating the duchy. They're giving it to you. Personally." The historic weight of it settled upon them. The Duchy of Cornwall, a vast, centuries-old estate providing the income for the heir to the throne, had always been intrinsically tied to the male heir. It was the bedrock of the Prince of Wales's independence. To sever that link, to bestow the title and its responsibilities upon the princess in her own right, was not just a gift. It was a constitutional earthquake, a reimagining of tradition so radical it left them both in stunned silence. This was not a birthday present. It was a revolution wrapped in vellum. The news did not remain private for long. A simultaneous announcement from Buckingham Palace and Downing Street was released at noon, causing an instant global media frenzy. News anchors stumbled over the unprecedented wording. Catherine, the Princess of Wales, is to be granted the title Duchess of Cornwall in her own right, in a personal gift from His Majesty the King on the occasion of her birthday. This historic move, recommended by the Prime Minister and approved by Parliament, recognizes her unparalleled dedication and her evolution into a cornerstone of the modern monarchy. Constitutional experts were called in, their voices tinged with awe and disbelief. Legal historians scrambled for precedents, finding only dusty, half-forgotten statutes from the Tudor era. The public reaction was a torrent of surprise, pride, and curiosity. For Catherine, the bubble of her private birthday shattered. Her phone began to buzz incessantly, first with congratulations from senior royals, then with calls from the king's private secretary, the prime minister's office, and the Duchy of Cornwall's own council. William, ever her anchor, handled the initial flood, but the reality was inescapable. Her life, her role, her very identity within the monarchy had just been fundamentally transformed. She was no longer just the wife of the future king. She was now a landed duchess, a peer of the realm in her own standing, with a portfolio, an income, and a set of responsibilities entirely separate from her husband. The weight of 7 centuries of history now rested on her shoulders alongside him, not behind him. That evening, a planned small family dinner at Windsor Castle with the king and queen became a profoundly different affair. The atmosphere was one of proud solemnity. King Charles III, his eyes crinkling with emotion, raised a glass. "To my beloved daughter-in-law," he began, his voice thick. "Today, we do not just celebrate your birth. We celebrate the remarkable woman you have become. This title is not merely an honor. It is an acknowledgement of truth. You have built, brick by brick, a legacy of compassion and strength. The Duchy of Cornwall is not just land and assets. It is a living, breathing entity that serves communities. I can think of no one better to be its steward." Catherine, feeling a surge of emotion, could only nod, squeezing William's hand under the table. The Queen Mother Camilla, too, offered a heartfelt embrace, whispering, "You have changed everything, my dear, for the better." Later, alone with William in their Windsor apartment, the enormity of it all truly hit. "How do I do this?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper, looking out at the ancient battlements. "How do I be that?" William turned her to face him. "The same way you do everything. With intelligence, with heart, and by not being afraid to ask for help. You've been preparing for this for 12 years. You just didn't know it. And you won't be doing it alone. The Duchy has a brilliant team. And you have me. We're a partnership. Now, that's just official." He presented her with a final, personal gift, a simple, elegant pen. "For signing your first official documents as the Duchess," he said with a soft smile. That night, sleep was elusive. Her mind raced with a kaleidoscope of images. The rolling fields of Cornwall, the anxious faces of tenants, the scrutiny of the press, the expectations of a nation. The little girl from Bucklebury who dreamed of being a mother was now, irrevocably, a duchess in her own right. The path forward was uncharted, daunting, and glittering with potential. The week that followed was a whirlwind of legalities and quiet introductions, a swift immersion into a world she had observed from the periphery, but never commanded. The sprawling London offices of the Duchy of Cornwall, steeped in masculine tradition with dark wood panels and portraits of past princes of Wales, felt like foreign territory. Her first meeting with the Duchy Council, a group of seasoned lawyers, financiers, and land managers, all men, all decades older, was a study in polite, palpable apprehension. They stood as she entered, their expressions a mixture of curiosity and deep-seated wariness. This was their domain, a well-oiled machine running on precedent, and she was an unknown variable, a woman, a royal, potentially a disruptor. Catherine, feeling the weight of their gaze, took her seat at the head of the historic table. She began not with dictates, but with questions. Gentle, insightful, probing questions about sustainable agriculture, about affordable housing projects on Duchy land, about the carbon neutrality goals she knew were part of William's vision. She referenced specific estates, asked about tenant welfare programs, and spoke about the mental health initiatives for rural communities she had championed. The initial stiffness in the room began to thaw, replaced by a dawning respect. She was not there to dismantle. She was there to understand, to integrate, to enhance. By the end of the 3-hour meeting, the conversation had flowed into a collaborative discussion about legacy and innovation. The CEO, a reserved man named Alistair, concluded by saying, "Your Royal Highness, your approach is refreshing. The Duchy is ready to support your vision." It was a small victory, but a crucial one. She had not conquered the room, but she had earned its attention. Amidst this steep learning curve, the public's fascination grew. Newspapers ran special supplements explaining the duchy's history and its new, unique situation. Commentators debated the feminist implications, the modernizing of the monarchy, and the practicalities of the arrangement. Catherine, however, was determined to anchor this abstract honor in tangible action. She decided her first public engagement as Duchess of Cornwall on her own right would not be a grand photo call at a historic estate, but a visit to a small, struggling farm on the Cornish coast, one she had learned was facing severe challenges due to changing weather patterns and market pressures. She arrived without fanfare, dressed in practical boots and a waxed jacket, asking the farmers, John and Mary Trevorrow, to simply show her their reality. She walked their sodden fields, listened to their fears about the future, asked about their family who wanted to leave farming, and took notes in a small, leather-bound book. What would help most? She asked, her voice sincere. Not a grant for a new tractor, necessarily, but what would make your life sustainable? Mary, with tears in her eyes, spoke of the isolation, the lack of mental health support for farming families. Catherine nodded. That's something we can work on. Together. The photographs that emerged were powerful. The princess, now Duchess, crouched in the mud, speaking eye to eye with those whose lives depended on the land she now stewarded. The headline was simple, The Listening Duchess. It resonated deeply. This was not a distant aristocrat. This was a hands-on, compassionate leader. Back at Kensington Palace, the dynamic between her and William's offices began a subtle, necessary shift. Her private secretary, Natasha, now had to coordinate directly with the duchy's administration and, with William's team, navigating a new tripartite structure. There were logistical puzzles. Which events would she attend as Princess of Wales, and which as Duchess of Cornwall? How would her new charitable fund, financed by a portion of the duchy income, be structured? One evening, over a late dinner of leftovers, William pushed a folder towards her. The first big test, he said. It was a proposal for a major, contentious housing development on duchy land near Newquay. The local council was for it, citing economic growth, but environmental groups and residents were fiercely opposed. The final decision, once as alone, now rested with her. What do you think? He asked, his tone neutral, giving her space. She spent 2 days poring over the environmental impact reports, the architectural plans, and the petitions from locals. She called experts and even had a discreet, off-the-record video call with a community leader from the area. Her decision was a masterclass in modern stewardship. She rejected the current proposal as environmentally damaging, but simultaneously announced the duchy would fund and lead a collaborative project to design a smaller, sustainable, and genuinely affordable housing community with a portion of the land preserved as public woodland. The announcement was praised for its nuance and wisdom. William read the statement before it was released and smiled, a proud, private smile. "You're a natural," he said. She had passed her first major test, not by mimicking tradition, but by forging a new path of balanced, conscientious leadership. The personal cost, however, began to reveal itself. The additional workload was immense. Late nights, studying briefings cut into time with the children. She missed Lewis's school play because of an unavoidable duchy council meeting, a fact that left a sharp ache in her chest. One night, Charlotte, perceptive beyond her years, asked, "Mummy, do you have to work for the duchy now like Daddy worked for being king?" Catherine pulled her close. "Yes, darling, in a way. But it's important work. It's about helping people and looking after special places. But we miss you," Charlotte stated simply. The guilt was a cold stone in her stomach. She sat down with William and their dedicated nanny, Maria, to ruthlessly restructure the family calendar. Protected time was marked in red. School runs, weekend walks, homework hours, and declared non-negotiable. She learned to delegate more, to trust her growing team. The balance was fragile, a tightrope walk over a canyon of duty and expectation. But She was determined to not let the historic honor steal the ordinary, precious moments that gave her strength. She was learning that to be a good duchess, she first had to protect the mother, the wife, the woman at her core. 6 months into her new role, Catherine decided it was time to define her legacy, to move from stewardship to transformation. The idea had been germinating since her visit to the Trevorrow farm. She announced the Cornwall Roots Initiative, a wide-reaching project funded entirely by her duchy income. Its 3 pillars were mental resilience in rural communities, sustainable futures for young farmers, and the preservation of coastal heritage. It was ambitious, deeply personal, and directly addressed the quiet crises she had witnessed. The launch was held at the Lost Gardens of a duchy-owned property in Cornwall. She spoke not from a podium, but standing among beehives and heritage vegetable plots. For centuries, the duchy has been about sustaining an institution, she said, her voice clear and carrying in the sea air. I want its work to be about sustaining people, their livelihoods, and this breathtaking landscape. Cornwall Roots is about investing in the foundation, so communities can thrive for generations to come. The reaction was overwhelmingly positive. Charities hailed it as a game-changer. The media, often cynical, noted the polished synergy between her personal passions and her official power. She was no longer just a patron. She was a funder, a strategist, a driver of change. With the initiative launched, she embarked on a solo tour of the duchy's territories, a journey of deep listening. She visited the Isles of Scilly, meeting fishermen concerned about marine conservation. She spent a day in a Dartmoor village hall, drinking endless cups of tea with elderly residents struggling with loneliness and poor transport links. In a former mining town in Cornwall, she sat with a group of teenagers in a youth center, asking about their hopes and the lack of opportunities that made them want to leave. She took notes, made promises to connect people, and followed up religiously. Her team began to joke about her red book of actionable items, which was always full. This was not ceremonial, it was diagnostic. She was building a mental map of needs, connecting dots between isolated communities, and using the unique convening power of her title to bring organizations together. During a visit to an organic farm in Somerset, the young farmer, Sarah, said to her, "You know, my granddad remembers the last prince visiting. He just drove through in a car. You're here, in the muck, asking about our soil health. It's different." Catherine smiled. The muck is where the truth is. The tour, however, was not without its first major storm. A national newspaper ran an investigative piece titled "The Duchess's Divide," criticizing the perceived conflict of interest between her role and William's, suggesting friction between their courts and questioning the cost of her new initiatives. It quoted anonymous sources hinting at tension. The story was a poison dart, aiming to undermine the very unity that was their strength. Catherine was wounded, not by the criticism of her work, but by the implication that she and William were in competition. William's rage was cold and formidable. He insisted on a joint, public appearance to quash the rumors immediately. They chose to visit a joint patronage, a homelessness project in London they had long supported together. Arriving hand in hand, they toured the facility, but it was the impromptu press scrum afterwards that became the defining moment. A reporter shouted the inevitable question about strain within the Wales household. William stepped forward, his arm firmly around Catherine's waist. "Not only is there no strain," he said, his tone leaving no room for ambiguity, "but working together as we do now, with Catherine's well-earned responsibilities, has made us stronger. This is a modern partnership. Any suggestion otherwise is a misrepresentation of our family and our work." Catherine, looking up at him, then to the reporters, added softly but firmly, "Our strengths complement each other. The duchy is a team effort, and my biggest supporter is standing right here." The images of their united front, the clarity of their words, evaporated the scandal. It solidified, for the public, the image of a powerful, equal duo. The attempt to divide them had only welded them closer. In the quiet aftermath of the media storm, Catherine sought a different kind of wisdom. She requested a private audience, not with a king or a prime minister, but with a woman who had walked the most challenging path before her, Queen Elizabeth II's former private secretary, the now-retired Lord Charteris. He was in his 90s, a living archive of constitutional nuance. They met in the sunlit conservatory of his country home. Over ginger biscuits and weak tea, he spoke not a strategy, but a philosophy. The institution, he said in his raspy voice, is a rock. But it is also a river. It must change course over the centuries, or it stagnates. What you have been given, my dear, is a chisel and a compass. The chisel to gently shape the rock, the compass to help steer the river. Use them with patience. The old guard will always grumble. But history is not made by those who simply follow the map. It is made by those who have the courage to draw a new one, while still respecting the old terrain. His words settled her nerves. She was not breaking tradition. She was continuing its essential task of evolution. She left feeling a profound connection to the long line of those who had served, armed with a renewed sense of purpose that was both humble and bold. The season turned to autumn, and Catherine faced a symbolic test. Her first official duchy ceremony, the ancient audit court in Cornwall, where the duchy's accounts were traditionally presented. It was a ritual steeped in medieval pageantry, full of arcane language and ceremony, never before presided over by a woman in her own right. She debated simplifying it, modernizing it. Instead, after much thought, she chose to honor its form while shifting its substance. She wore a modern tailored coat, but in the duchy's colors. She followed the rituals to the letter, accepting the rolled parchment accounts with solemnity. But afterwards, instead of a formal lunch with dignitaries, she hosted a working reception for the tenants, community nurses, and young entrepreneurs she had met on her tour. The ancient hall echoed with lively, modern conversation about broadband access and renewable energy, sandwiched between its historic tapestries. It was a perfect metaphor for her approach. Deep respect for the past, unwavering focus on the present needs of the people. As she left the hall, an elderly tenant, his hands gnarled from a lifetime of work, approached her. He didn't bow. He simply took her hand in both of his. "My family has worked duchy land for 5 generations," he said, his voice thick. "We've seen many change, but you see us. Thank you, Duchess." In that moment, the title, the history, the weight of it all finally felt not like a burden, but like a tool. It felt authentically like her own. The crisp winter air carried the scent of wood smoke and salt as Catherine stood on the clifftop at Tintagel, the mythical birthplace of King Arthur and land belonging to the duchy. Below, the Atlantic roared, a relentless force of nature. She was here to finalize plans for the most ambitious piece of the Cornwall Roots Initiative, the transformation of a derelict cluster of duchy-owned farm buildings into the Haven, a residential center offering free mental health retreats for farming families and emergency service workers from across the region. It was a direct response to the pain she had heard in Mary Trevorrow's voice months before. The local architect, a young Cornish woman named Eloan, pointed to the weathered stone shells. "We use local materials, sustainable timber, geothermal heating. It'll be a place of healing that's part of the landscape, not imposed on it." Catherine nodded, her vision taking physical shape. This project was her heart made visible, a tangible, lasting good flowing directly from the unprecedented honor she'd received. As they walked, Eloan hesitated, then said, "My dad was a fisherman. He took his own life during the last downturn. A place like this, it would have given him a hand to hold." Catherine stopped, placing a hand on the young woman's arm. "That's why we're building it," she said, her voice soft with empathy. "So others have that hand." Back in London, the administrative machinery of her new role was now a well-integrated part of her life. Her office buzzed with a sense of shared mission. Her private secretary, Natasha, presented her with the first annual impact report for her duchy-funded work. The numbers were encouraging, grants disbursed, partnerships formed, but Catherine focused on the individual stories compiled in an appendix. A young farmer who had received business mentoring, a coastal path restored by volunteers, a rural counseling service that had expanded its reach. This was the real currency. Yet, the pressure to perform, to justify the historic decision made in her favor, was a constant, low hum. One afternoon, a briefing note from a conservative think tank landed on her desk, questioning the financial transparency of her charitable fund and the scope creep of a royal's involvement in grassroots policy. It was a warning shot from traditionalist quarters. She didn't dismiss it. Instead, she invited the head of the think tank for a private discussion at Kensington Palace. She listened to his concerns about precedent and overreach, then calmly walked him through her mandate, the strict governance of her fund, and the documented needs her work addressed. She didn't win him over, but she earned his grudging respect. "You are certainly thorough, Your Royal Highness," he conceded as he left. She knew the scrutiny would never fully abate. She had to be bulletproof, not through aggression, but through impeccable, transparent work. The Christmas season arrived, bringing with it the first major family celebration where her new status was woven into the fabric of royal tradition. At the King's annual pre-Christmas lunch at Buckingham Palace for the extended family and senior members of the firm, the seating arrangement held a subtle surprise. Catherine was seated not merely as William's wife, but on the King's right hand, a place of singular honor. The conversation flowed around diplomacy and public sentiment, and the King frequently turned to her, asking, "And how are you finding the Duchy's approach to that, Catherine? Or what's the feeling on the ground in the Southwest?" She answered with a quiet authority that made other seasoned royals listen. Princess, and famously no nonsense, gave her a firm nod of approval across the table, the equivalent of a standing ovation. Later, during the gift exchange, William handed her a small, wrapped box. Inside was not jewelry, but a simple, beautifully crafted silver key. "It's symbolic," he whispered, "to the Duchy offices, to the future, to your own door." It was a perfect gift, acknowledging the independence and responsibility she now held. That night, caroling at Sandringham, standing between George and Charlotte under a frosty sky, she felt a profound sense of integration. The honor was no longer an external shock. It had become part of her family story. The new year began with a challenge that required every ounce of her newfound authority. A historic Duchy-owned estate in Herefordshire, comprising a dozen tied cottages and a large home farm, was at the center of a bitter dispute. The long-term tenant farmer had died, and his son, eager to implement radical modern methods, was in conflict with the elderly residents of the cottages, who feared change and eviction. It was a microcosm of the tensions across rural Britain. Local media had picked up the story, framing it as the Duchess's dilemma. Her team prepared a balanced brief, but the decision was hers alone. Instead of ruling from London, she went there. She spent a day in the drafty village hall, listening to the furious young farmer, to the tearful pensioners, to the parish council. She toured the cottages, saw the damp, and also walked the inefficient farmyard. Her solution was a negotiated masterstroke. She approved the young farmer's innovative plans, securing the estate's economic future, but on the condition that he and the Duchy co-invested in immediately refurbishing the cottages, guaranteeing the residents lifetime tenancies, and creating a community garden they could manage. She also connected the farmer with a sustainability grant from Cornwall Roots. It wasn't a win-lose. It was a complex, humane win-win. The news was reported as the Duchess's decisive diplomacy. More importantly, it cemented her reputation as a fair, intelligent, and decisive landowner who listened and acted with heart. As winter deepened, a personal reflection underscored her public journey. Sorting through old boxes at her parents' home in Bucklebury, she found a school essay she'd written at age 15. The title was My Future. In it, the young Catherine Middleton had written of wanting a family, of maybe working in art or photography, of helping people in some way she couldn't yet define. There was no mention of palaces, titles, or duchies. She showed it to William that evening. "Look," she said, a lump in her throat. "The core of it, it's still the same. The family, the helping. Everything else is just the extraordinary wrapping." He read it and smiled. "The wrapping is historic, my love. But you're right. The gift inside is still you." This realization became her anchor. The unprecedented honor had not changed her essence. It had amplified her ability to act on it. She was not playing a role designed for someone else. She was using a unique platform to live her own values on a grander scale. The little girl from Bucklebury and the Duchess of Cornwall in her own right were finally one and the same. The journey of the last year had been about reconciling those two selves, and she had emerged not fractured, but forged into something stronger and more complete. The spring sunshine dappled through the new leaves in the gardens of the duchy-owned Tremeton Castle as Catherine, dressed in a simple linen dress, addressed a gathering of the first cohort of Cornwall Roots, youth ambassadors. These were teenagers from across the duchy's territories, passionate about environmental and social issues, who would act as advisors and messengers in their communities. "Don't be afraid to tell me when I get it wrong," she told them, her tone warm and direct. "Your vision is what this is all about." A 17-year-old from the Isles of Scilly asked her, "Weren't you scared to take on something so big and new?" Catherine paused, considering. "Terrified," she admitted with a genuine laugh that put the group at ease. "But being scared means you care. And when you care, you find the strength to learn, to listen, and to keep going." This honest exchange, filmed in part for the duchy's social media, showed a leader comfortable in her own skin, mentoring the next generation not from a pedestal, but as a fellow traveler. The project was now a living, breathing ecosystem of its own, a testament to her philosophy of empowerment over patronage. The summer's official highlight was the annual Duchy Day, a traditional event modernized under her direction. It was now less a display of feudal heritage and more a vibrant showcase of the communities and projects she championed. There were stalls run by young farmers from her Sustainable Futures program, demonstrations by craftsmen restoring duchy cottages, and a quiet tent offering information on mental health resources. Catherine and William moved through the crowds together, but often separately, each drawn into different conversations. He discussing urban renewal with a visiting mayor. She deepened conversation with a group of women running a coastal cleanup charity. Photographers captured them reuniting in the middle of the field, sharing an update, their body language one of easy partnership and mutual respect. The narrative of competition had died completely, replaced by one of powerful, complementary co-leadership. The day culminated not with a formal speech, but with Catherine introducing a local folk band to the main stage. As the music swirled, she stood with a group of tenant farmers, tapping her foot, her face relaxed and joyful. This was her domain, not as a ruler, but as a proud member of a community she served. With the public role firmly established, her influence began to resonate in more private, institutional ways. She was quietly consulted on a review of the Crown Estate's sustainability practices. The King's staff sought her insight on community engagement strategies for his own charities. Within palace walls, her success had become a compelling case study for a more distributed, expertise-driven monarchy. It sparked quiet, positive conversations about the potential future roles of George, Charlotte, and Louis, imagining a monarchy where each member could develop a portfolio of meaningful, substantive work based on their skills, not just their birth order. Catherine, unaware of the full extent of this ripple effect, simply focused on doing the job well. Yet by her very existence as a duchess in her own right, she had opened a door in the centuries-old monarchy that could not be closed, showing that strength could be multiplied, not divided, when shared. On the eve of her next birthday, a year after the vellum parchment had arrived, she took a solitary walk in the grounds of Sandringham, where the family was staying. The setting sun cast long shadows. She thought of the whirlwind year, the shock, the learning, the challenges, the small, tangible victories. She thought of the farmer who thanked her, the young architect's grief, the relieved faces of the tenants in Herefordshire. The honor had been a seed, and she had spent a year carefully, tirelessly tending it, willing it to grow into something of real, lasting use. It was no longer an honor in the abstract. It was a tool, a responsibility, a platform that was now inextricably part of her. She felt a deep, quiet satisfaction that had nothing to do with title or status, and everything to do with purpose fulfilled. She had not just received history. She had begun to shape it gently and firmly in the image of her own values. Returning to the house, the sound of her children's laughter spilled from an open window. George, Charlotte, and Louis ran to her, pulling her towards the drawing room, where William waited with a cake lit with candles. "Happy birthday, Mummy! Happy birthday, Duchess!" Louis shouted, mixing up the titles in his excitement. Everyone laughed. As she bent to blow out the candles, surrounded by the faces she loved most, her wish was not for herself. It was for the strength to continue the work, to honor the trust placed in her, and to ensure that when her children were grown, the legacy of this unprecedented honor would be a simpler thing, a mother who tried her best to make a difference. The story that began with a formal envelope on a frosty morning had woven itself into the fabric of her life, a thread of duty now inseparable from the threads of love, family, and service that had always defined her. The historic moment was not just a day in January. It was the beginning of a new, enduring chapter, written in simple English words, one honest day at a time.